Hi everyone, a warm welcome to you all to today's Safeguarding webinar. It's an initiative by the World Rowing Athletes Commission together with World Rowing. My name is Frida Svensson. I'm the current chair of World Rowing Athletes Commission. Before I introduce my colleagues here on today's webinar, I would like to take a moment to say a few words about the situation in Ukraine. It wouldn't be appropriate to be discussing safeguarding matters on this webinar today without acknowledging the situation we're having in Ukraine. As mentioned in World Rowing statement of March 1st, World Rowing strongly condemns the Russian military invasion of Ukraine and then using violation of the Olympic truce. Our organization stands in absolute solidarity with the Ukrainian people, including our friends at the Ukrainian rowing family at this time of grave international crisis. World Rowing Athletes Commission are in close contact with many of the Ukrainian athletes. We have members of our commission working day and night to assist Ukrainian athletes to a safe place within Europe. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback regarding the situation or how we can help and assist athletes, please don't hesitate to contact either me or any of my commission members. I would also like to share compassion with Russian and Belarusian athletes. We are also aware that this is a very difficult time for them. At this time, our thoughts and prayers are with you all. Thank you for understanding and thank you for moving on with today's webinar. Now it's time for me to introduce my colleagues here on today's call. As you saw on the slide before we started, we have some amazing people with us today. And I will start with the women, of course. First out is Hannah, one of my colleagues in the Athletes Commission. Hannah is from Australia and World Rowing Athletes Commission member since many years back. Welcome, Hannah. Second, Lenka, former Athletes Commission chair. She's an Olympian and one of the initiative takers to World Rowing safeguarding policy that we have today. Welcome, Lenka. Third, Anna-Marie Phelps from UK. Anna-Marie raised the women's 8 in the Olympic Games of '96. Anna-Marie is also chair of European Rowing Board. Welcome, Anna-Marie. We have Sandra Kirby from Canada, competed in the women's quad at the Olympic Games of '76. Welcome, Sandy. We also have a guest speaker with us today, Yetsa. Yetsa is a former long jumper, represented Ghana until 2016. Thank you, Yetsa, for joining us. We have Siswe from South Africa, also a member of the Athletes Commission. He's also working closely with World Rowing Development Committee and Department. Siswe is an Olympic champion in the men's lightweight men's 4 from Olympic Games in London. Welcome, Siswe. We also have a guest panelist with us today. It's Olaf Tufte from Norway, Olympic champion, world champion, and a recipient of Thomas Keller Medal 2022. Thank you, Olaf, for joining us. On the call today, we also have Ludovika. I call her the technical director of this call. We have Lucy, also from our staff in Lausanne. Thank you all for joining us. And once again, big thank you to all your participants, all you athletes around the world for taking the time to join us today. This is for us all on how to create a safe training environment around the globe within our sport. Today's webinar is about athletes' rights and also responsibilities with respect of safeguarding. What you need to know. You can see it here on the screen. The desired outcomes of today's webinar: to raise athletes' awareness that safe sport is everyone's responsibility, athletes can contribute to making sport a safer place. And when we say everyone's responsibility, we're talking about athletes, coaches, entourage, club coaches, and all the way up to the board. Today's outcome is also about how to empower athletes to be aware of their rights, but also their responsibilities, and to have confidence to act. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the Q&A using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The chat will be open today, but the chat will be to communicate with the panelists. So if you have questions to panelists, write your questions in the chat. Anna-Marie Phelps will moderate the chat, and she will ask for the floor when there is a question she feels that we need to raise. And one of the panelists will try and respond. Thank you. Before we start the webinar, we also have a few housekeeping items. We have a few presentations today from our guest speakers. We have a video from Emma Twigg. We have our guest speaker, Jetse. We will also listen to Anna-Marie and Sandy. After Jetse's presentation, there will be a panel discussion with live Q&A, so all you participants can join in on this one. And you put your questions in the Q&A. As you can see on the screen now, if there are any of you who wish to contact any of the safeguarding officers within World Rowing, you can now see how to contact them on the screen. The links on the screen are not direct links, so you can't use them, but they will be put up in the chat, and you can go from there, and there will be live links. Before we start with the video from Emma Twigg, Olympic champion from New Zealand, we'd like to ask for your assistance with a live poll. The poll is confidential, no names will be shown. We would like you to answer as truthfully as you can. We'll give you a minute or two to answer. When we take the poll down, we will share with you the results. So please go ahead and take part in the live poll. We will keep the poll open for a few more seconds. Please take part and give us your answers. Let's keep it up there, Ludovika, for a few more seconds. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Before we go to Emma's video, I will now like to share a few of the results from the questions you just answered. So we had 2/3 of you answering these questions. Before I go ahead with revealing the results, I would like to share with you that at the end of the webinar, we will do this again and see if it has changed your opinion. So this is one of 2 live polls that we will do today. First question, how confident are you that your sport treats all genders fairly and equally? So 1, 16%. 2, maybe I should say before I start, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 means not confident, 5 very confident. So I start all over again. 1, 16%, 2, 16%, 3, 32%, 4, 29%, and 5, very confident, 5%. I will not comment on the answers, I will just share them with you. On the second question, how confident are you that your sport is protecting your mental and physical health? Once again, I remind you, 1, not confident, 5, very confident. 1, 23%, 2, 10%, 3, 35%, 4, 26%, and 5, 6%. I will not comment on the answers. I will just go ahead to third question. Third question, how confident are you to freely express? I remind you, 1, not confident, 5, very confident. So 3, 29%, 4, 16%, and 5, 19%. Thank you to everyone who answered these questions. We will come back with the live poll at the end of the webinar. Now it's time to move forward. And our first guest speaker is Emma Twigg, the Olympic champion from the Olympic Games 2021 in the women's single. Ludovika, can you please play the video?
Hi everyone, Emma Twigg here from New Zealand Rowing. I just wanted to give you my thoughts on what I think a healthy and happy inclusive training environment is, and where we need to support athletes in making sure that they know their rights and responsibilities when it comes to abuse and harassment in sport. So I've been very lucky in my career to have been surrounded by fantastic people, and most of the time they've been really encouraging and supportive of me. But I know that this isn't the case for everyone in our sport. And I think just as we're taught to look after our health or injuries as a young athlete, we should be also taught how to manage harassment or abuse if we do come across something like this in our sport. And we should learn about this from a really young age. I think education of athletes and coaches in this space on identifying what harassment and abuse is versus just working hard, which is what our sport requires, is going to be really important moving forward. As an athlete, I think we all need to talk about our experiences more and understand that there are places that we can seek help if needed. And I think it's up to World Rowing and the wider rowing community to make sure that there are avenues for athletes to tap into, to report cases of abuse and bullying, and make sure that there are places for vulnerable athletes to go and make sure that their voices are heard.
Thank you, Emma. Now we move ahead to Anna-Marie. Please share with us a few words regarding athletes' rights and responsibilities.
Thank you, Frida. It's great to hear from Emma of her experiences and the priorities that she thinks we need to be focusing on as a sport. As you've mentioned before, we're really going to focus today on athlete rights and responsibilities, and that specifically is around helping you to help shape your environment so that you have a sustainable and safe environment where you can thrive and you can excel. We are specifically looking at the behaviours and cultures that impact from a safeguarding perspective when we talk about rights and responsibilities over the course of this webinar and the following webinar. I want to be clear that World Rowing really does believe that everyone in our sport should be treated with respect and be free from harm and abuse. And we genuinely mean that, and we're working to ensure that the right things are in place. But it's really important that our athletes also understand what their rights are and the balancing part of that, which is their responsibility. So one of the key areas and one of the key resources for all of our athletes is the athlete365.com website, which has the IOC Athletes Declaration quite clearly set out and some really good resources and really good videos. The IOC Athletes Declaration is enshrined in World Rowing statutes and bylaws, and therefore is very much part of our sport and the way that we would like to see our sport run. The declaration aims to empower athletes to tackle key issues and to help shape the future, making sure that your voice, the voice of athletes, is heard. It balances rights and responsibilities and really focuses on the most relevant issues that were raised by athletes in consultation. So it's important to think about not just what your rights are, but also how you act and how what you do impacts others in your environment. When we normally talk about safeguarding and safeguarding against abuse and harassment, we often focus on coaches or those in positions of power. But it's also important to recognise that quite often what we call peer-on-peer harassment, but the way that other athletes around you behave, can actually be, in some environments, the most common form of harm. The key rights relating to safeguarding in the Athlete Declaration, there are 12 rights altogether, and I just want to pick out the ones that really relate to safeguarding. The first is no discrimination, and clearly ensuring that people are not discriminated against and that the environment is inclusive is absolutely key to safeguarding. The second is transparent and fair sport, and then fair and equal gender representation, right number 6, which is a very important one, particularly given the links with harassment and abuse and gender-based violence. The 7th right that's key is the protection of mental health, including a safe competition and training environment and protection from abuse and harassment, really explicitly saying how important it is that you as athletes have the right environment to be able to train and compete in. But there are 3 others as well, which I think are key to this. Election representation, which ensures the voice of the athlete is heard at decision-making level, the whistleblowing policies, and ensuring that there is due process and a fair hearing so that there is no recrimination for raising genuine concerns by athletes. Some of the key documents relating to safe sport, such as this Athlete Declaration and World Rowing's Safeguarding and Harassment and Abuse Policy, are enshrined in our statutes, as I've mentioned. And there's also the IOC consensus statement on harassment and abuse. And some of these may be a bit wordy and long, but they are really helpful to look at. And I think if you go to the Athlete 365 website, you'll find some helpful short videos explaining what these are. I really would encourage you to be familiar with their existence, with their sort of high level meaning and content, and to be asking questions of your own federation to make sure that you have an equivalent policy available to you in your country. Lastly, I just want to turn very briefly to responsibilities, because the balance to having rights is that you should be safe from abuse, but you need to be conscious of your part in supporting others. and be proactive in creating the right environment for everybody in the sport of rowing. Again, just focusing on those responsibilities from the athlete declaration that are most suitable here. The first, of course, is upholding the Olympic values, which we all live to. Number 3 is to acting in accordance with the IOC Code of Ethics, and specifically to proactively report unethical behavior, including harassment and abuse when you see it. Because if we don't actually call out those poor behaviors, then it's as good as participating and being part of them. Number 5 is to respect the rights and well-being of other athletes, volunteers, the entourage and others, and not to discriminate against anyone. Number 7 is to act as a role model. 8, to be informed and aware of your responsibilities. And the last 2, to participate, to vote, and to be honest in matters of integrity. I'm sure none of these things are things that you wouldn't dream of doing anyway, but just that awareness and an understanding of the balance of rights and responsibilities is a really key part of ensuring the right environment for everyone. Thank you very much. Frida, I'm going to just hand back to you.
Thank you, Anna-Marie. Thank you for sharing this very important information and for raising some of the points that we will both discuss and address today, and for our second webinar next Monday, same time and place. So please don't forget about that. Once again, thank you, Anna-Marie. And we will also share the link with you. We can put it up on the Athletes Commission social media channels, so you can be directed to the Athlete 365 website and the declaration. Now it's time for our next guest speaker, and that is Jetsa. Jetsa is a sports and wellness expert. She will share with us her thoughts and her research, and she will now share the screen. The floor is yours, Jetsa.
Thanks so much, Frida. I'll just share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see this. All right, so it's a joy to present with you today. Anna-Marie nicely set up some of the connections between athletes' rights and safe sport. I have no conflicts of interest. So in this talk, I'm going to describe 2 things. First, the development and the results of the Athletes' Rights Survey, and then second, limitations, conclusions, and implications. So let's just start with the premise that an athlete-centered approach to safeguarding really positions it as an athlete's human right. That was first articulated in the 2016 consensus statement that Anna-Marie described. 1 year and then 2 years later, the World Players Association and the IOC put forth their athletes' rights declarations, which said, among other things, that players or athletes sit at the intersection between sport and human rights, right? Now, these rights, which are ensconced or enshrined in many policies, may not actually translate to the lived experience of athletes. So we thought it was important to understand the knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs athletes themselves have about their identities as rights bearers. I think that's essential for creating safe environments where, if athletes have no concept of rights, there can neither be recognition of violations or impetus for defense. So, said another way, before a person's rights can be defended, they must first understand them. This was the impetus for our research team's project, which we call the Athletes' Rights Survey. The goal was to decide or determine athletes' knowledge, their attitudes, and their beliefs about their right to a sports environment that is free from harassment and abuse. This was the team. One of my program managers, Dimitri Gutos, did a lot of the heavy lifting, so I just want to acknowledge him. And this was our data analyst team. Give me a second so I can just make this a little bit smaller. Okay, perfect. So the main question again was, do athletes know and believe in their rights in the context of sports? We developed a 2-part survey. The first was a knowledge construct, which had 5 statements. Second was an attitudes and beliefs construct, 8 statements. The last question asked if athletes were aware of these IOC and WPA declarations. We also left a free text box at the end. Athlete engagement consisted of 10 English-speaking athletes from 5 continents taking the first draft, and the survey was iterated thereafter. This whole process, start to finish, just developing the survey, took about 1 calendar year. The knowledge construct consisted of 5 yes/no statements, which were lifted directly from the IOC declaration. We chose the 5 that applied to most sports environments. And the attitudes and beliefs construct, that consisted of 8 Likert scale statements where athletes were asked the extent to which they agreed with the statement. So these 2 constructs were paired. So a knowledge statement might be, every athlete has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. That's one of the questions you were asked in the poll at the beginning of this webinar. The associated attitudes and belief statement is, it's always okay for me to freely express my opinion in the context of my sport. So they were all paired. And as you can see, some of the attitudes and belief statements were derived from multiple, some of the attitudes and belief statements were multiple as paired with the knowledge. We went live in February of 2020. We used a social media strategy to recruit our athletes. We distributed the survey in 6 languages. This was one of the videos that my students put together. I'll just skip to the end so you can see how we ended it.
Be heard.
Take the survey. So we try to get people engaged that way.
I'm an athlete.
We took a 3-step approach to validation, literature review, followed by a qualitative study, followed by a quantitative study. Some of the details are here on the screen, but just know that it was a bit of a lengthy process. Ultimately, the survey was validated in an international audience setting. This is the confirmatory factor analysis. And now here are some of our results. And this is sort of the part that I was hoping to get to so we could hear your opinions on it. We had about 1159 respondents, 730 gave us complete surveys. 60% were between the ages of 18 and 29, so a young group. About split even down the middle. For those who are male versus female identifying, we had 49 unique sports. 18% of our participants were from the Paralympic group, whereas the rest were from the Olympic. 60% competed at the international level. Most were currently competing. So again, young, equally balanced across the genders, mostly Olympic, mostly international competing athletes from 49 sports. Most of the athletes were not part of unions. And then again, there were 70 countries represented. Even though there were so many countries represented, really it was skewed towards athletes from Europe and North America. So this is one of the limitations of the study. As I mentioned, 49 sports were represented. The most were from swimming. And as you can see, rowing comes in there at 2.7%. 20 of our athlete respondents were rowers or para rowers. So here are some of our results. The majority of athletes actually did know what their rights were. So as you can see, 95.9, 91.9, 86.8, 92.3, 86.8% knew their rights. The lowest knowledge answers were among the right for every athlete being entitled to have their personal data shared, and then every athlete having access to effective remedy when their rights are not respected. Those came in at 86.8, both. Still though, the majority really did know what their rights were. Now, the interesting part is that they were much less clear if they actually believed in them. So right here, you can see the knowledge construct responses. They are all skew over to the right here, on the right of your screen. Whereas, as you can see on the attitudes and beliefs construct, the answers are a little bit all over the place. So let's dive a little bit more deeply into that data. Here, it became clear that there was little to no ambiguity about the word violence, right? So when asked the question, how much do you agree with the statement? When I'm training and competing in my sport, it's sometimes okay for coaches to use any kind of violence against me, or it's sometimes okay for teammates to use any kind of violence against me. The numbers were pretty clear. 90.4 and 92.5% of athletes strongly disagreed or somewhat disagreed with those statements. However, when we inserted the word pressure, it was kind of evenly split down the middle, right? So it's okay for coaches to pressure me. It's okay for teammates to pressure me. We got 40% agreeing and 47% disagreeing. So again, no ambiguity around the word violence, but there was ambiguity around the word pressure. Coming up to a little bit more of a detailed discussion about what one of the questions that you guys were asked actually, we found that 14% of the athletes did not agree that they could freely express their personal opinion in the context of their sport. So in the survey that Frida put out at the beginning, 20% of you said that you strongly agree that you could freely express your opinion. So that's good, you're doing much better here than the athletes that we surveyed. But we thought that was of interest. Secondly, a full 19% did not agree that they can freely seek redress or remedy for harms if they feel that their rights have been violated. So these two numbers to me are of interest because among 730 complete responses, but 1,159 athletes, 19% is a big number and 14% is also a big number. Suffice it to say that the rowing sub-analysis told the same story. This is the rowing data, and it's a lot and it's a busy slide, but it looks very similar in terms of the outcomes of the descriptive analysis that I just showed. So to summarize the descriptive analysis, it's a mixed bag. 79% of the athletes we surveyed had no idea that the World Players Association and the IOC put out these athletes' rights declarations. 17% did know. When it comes to knowledge, most athletes expressed strong knowledge and consistent knowledge about athletes' rights, but they were unaware of the declarations. However, when it came to the attitudes and beliefs, there was ambiguity around the word pressure, what it means, and a full 14 to 19% did not believe that they could freely express their opinion or that they could report harms without any consequence of retaliation. Now, we then did a regression analysis. This is where we tried to see to what extent did knowledge correlate with beliefs, because we know at the end of the day, it's beliefs that drive behavior. So here are some of the results that I wanted to highlight for you. I bolded and underlined the statistically significant results for ease of understanding and comprehension. So when it comes to the question, it's sometimes okay for coaches to use any kind of violence towards me. Male athletes and Olympic athletes were much more likely to agree that yes, it is absolutely sometimes okay for coaches to use violence against me. Similarly, those who did not know that it's a right of athletes to pursue sport free of discrimination, harassment, and violence, they were also likely to say that it's okay for coaches to use violence against me. Said another way, female athletes and Paralympic athletes were likely to disagree that it's okay for coaches to use violence against me. And those who did know that, yes, it's a right of every athlete to pursue sport without discrimination, harassment, and violence, they were likely to disagree that it was likely for coaches to use, it was okay for coaches to use violence. Coming to the second box there, it's sometimes okay for teammates to use any kind of violence against me. Same thing. Male athletes said, yeah, I'm more likely to agree with that statement. Those who did not know that this was an athlete's right were also more likely to agree with that statement. Coming to the third box, it's sometimes okay for coaches to pressure me in any way. Interestingly, those athletes who are more likely to agree include athletes where their sport includes an element of subjective judging. So that's like figure skating, gymnastics, where it's an aesthetic sport. Similarly, those sports that were non-contact, those athletes were more likely to agree that it's okay for coaches to pressure me in some kind of way. Said another way, those sports where no subjective judging is part of it, where the sports are not aesthetic, and contact sports were likely to disagree that it's okay for coaches to pressure me. Moving now to the fourth box, where we asked, it's sometimes okay for teammates and others to pressure me. Men, again, as compared to women, were much more likely to agree that that's okay. And if their sport included an element of subjective judging, again, aesthetic sports like figure skating or gymnastics were also more likely to agree. Coming down to this fifth box, where actually you were asked at the beginning. When we asked the athletes, to what extent do you agree that it's always okay for me to freely express my opinion? The most statistically significant correlation was for athletes who absolutely knew that it's a right of every athlete to have freedom of opinion and expression. They agreed that it's always okay for me to freely express my opinion. Similarly, those who were male were more likely to agree. Those who were female were less likely to agree that it's always okay for me to freely express my opinion. Those who are a member of a players' union were more likely to agree that it's always okay for me to freely express my opinion. And those who are not a member of a players' union were more likely to disagree. And finally, though that little 17% that had some kind of awareness about these athletes' rights declarations, they were also likely to agree, yeah, it's always okay for me to freely express my opinion. When asked if someone has access to my personal information, I should know how long it's being used. To what extent do you agree or disagree? Those who knew that it's an athlete's right to have their personal data protected were more likely to agree, and that was the only correlate there. Finally, when asked if I experience behavior that I deem inappropriate, I can seek assistance without fear of consequence or retaliation. Those who played multiple sports were more likely to agree. And those whose sport did not include an element of subjective judging were also more likely to include. Men, to agree, sorry. Men were also more likely to agree, and then non-international competitors were more likely to agree, so non-elite athletes. Said another way, females were less likely to agree that I can seek assistance without fear of consequence or retaliation. And elite athletes, or those who were competing at the international level, were less likely to agree that they could seek assistance if their rights were violated without any fear of consequence or retaliation. So the regression analysis, I think, is very interesting in terms of what it tells us about how athletes really feel about expressing their rights in the context of sport, not just knowing them. Here are some of the limitations. First, we have a globally imbalanced sample, of course. Most were from North America and Europe. Rights-based language can inherently be confusing. So words like remedy, retaliation, sometimes this may not be fully understood across the board. When it comes to correlation, there was a low correlation between knowledge of rights and beliefs in them, meaning you can know something but not necessarily believe in it, or you can know something and not necessarily believe that you can express it in the context of your sport. In some cases, there was a high correlation between lack of knowledge of rights and lack of beliefs in them. And then here are some of the trends. Significant variables which are essentially directing the extent to which athletes believe that they can express their rights in their sports include the gender of the athlete, whether they're Olympic or a Paralympic competitor, the level of competition, elite versus non-elite, whether the sport is aesthetic, and whether the athlete was a member of a union. Some of the implications for ongoing safeguarding research is that it's necessary to take a closer look at those who responded, no, this is not an athlete's right. Who are they? What context did they come from? What sports were they participating in, et cetera? Second, to increase awareness of these issues, organizations may need to improve their education strategies to make sure they're actually reaching athletes. So 79% of samples are not fully unaware of these declarations. And then finally, increasing athletes' knowledge alone may not be the best strategy because we know that knowledge here does not correlate reliably with beliefs. And we also know that beliefs are what drive our behavior in real life scenarios, whether they're implicit or explicit beliefs, they're what make us do what we do. So, as was mentioned, an ecosystem culture change is what's required. In conclusion, I think you and your teammates, as Anne-Marie already mentioned, do have a right to safe and healthy sport environments. Everyone can help create responsible sport. The social environment, meaning the culture, really matters here. As you can see, knowledge does not always correlate with beliefs. Beliefs are not always consistent among different athletes, so we can't rely on that alone. A culture change is really important, and a close-knit culture can actually mitigate the often punishing conditions of sport. I always like to highlight the ski powerhouse, Norway, because they really exemplify this idea. Teammates share techniques, they cheer for one another, they work, play, and win together. One of the skiers even said, if you have teammates who consistently lift you up, then you work harder and stay motivated. So it's about culture change and making sure that we create a responsible sport environment collectively. I think athletes have always known this intuitively, and it's nice to be able to supply some empirical data to support that collective intuition. This concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Yetsa. Very interesting what you just shared with us. I have one question, and I would like to direct this to everyone in the panel, and whoever feel can answer it. The results from Yetsa's presentation, any surprises to any of you? Sandy, please go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I've seen the data, so I had the advantage of actually having read the paper before and seen the material before, and I'm still surprised that high-level athletes, high-performance athletes, who we think are so strong and so capable in so many spheres, actually don't appear to have a strong connection between what their rights are and their ability to act on them. So that tells me as a researcher that there's a whole lot more work to do specifically with high performance athletes about linking the knowing of their rights to the ability to, the confidence to express them and the confidence to act on them. So it surprised me that that gap was there at the high performance level.
Yeah, I agree. Hannah, any comments from you regarding what Sandy has mentioned?
No, I think I agree that there is a big gap there, and it does surprise me in one sense, and then doesn't surprise me in another. You know, having been there, you're so focused on the task at hand, you kind of omit some of it while you're focusing so heavily on the task, and then sometimes it's not till you're removed from that environment that you can actually look back and see that. So yeah, there's definitely work to be done there.
Linka.
Yeah, I am second what Hannah just said. I think when you're in a training process, you're and you, again, what Jette was mentioning, the environment, you are raised in an environment where it's normal that the coach yells at you and, you know, and doesn't talk to you when you don't perform well. So it's about changing these cultural things, the mindset, and, you know, empower the athletes to say, no, this is not helping me. If you're yelling at me, it's not helping me. If you talk to me and you criticize me constructively, that's helping me. And that's just sort of the switch that needs to go on to change the culture where we're training in. And it's really difficult. It's going to be really difficult for the athletes to do that. It's everyone around them who needs to make that culture shift.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Linka. Valid points. Yes, Olaf, please go ahead.
Thanks for all this knowledge, which I actually didn't read anywhere else. But what I firmly believe in is role modeling. I firmly believe that everyone is a role model. Doesn't matter how old you are, how good you are. It's always people looking into what you're doing. So what we can do as athletes or coaches or the best senior juniors is to get more knowledge of how your behavior actually will encourage other people to do what you do. So if you're a good role model, the other one will catch it up. If you're a bad one, they will catch it up, and that will be the culture you're a part of. So if everybody else, you're probably going to yell as well. And I think this is, sometimes we like to be yelled at, but we are all different people, and a coach's role is to find out, what does Hannah want me to do? Does she want not punishment, but does she want me to yell at her or just clap her shoulder and encourage? This is the hard part from being a coach or the older member of a group, how to encourage everybody to perform their best. But being a good role model, it's a lot of responsibility, but I think that's the way to go quite early, to make people know that you are a role model to all these people.
Yes, thank you, Olaf. I think we all agree on your comment and feedback on that. And I have a follow-up question for you, Olaf, before I hand the floor to Anne-Marie. I mean, Olaf, you're one of the biggest role models within Norwegian sport and also wall of rowing, of course. But I have a question for you. I mean, you started as the youngster when you raced the Olympic Games in the four, not that many years ago, but a few years back. And you ended your career being the old man in the boat. How was it for you, if you reflect on your career, when you came in as a youngster and when you ended as one of the old boys in last year's Olympic Games?
Well, I think that when I started, the culture was a bit harder than we are today, because back in the days, we're like, this is the way, or that's the door. So the older guys was much rougher than we are today. And I can be kind of the rough guy, but I also get empathy because I believe I know what you need to do. But the run up and the learning process from being one of the kids, just coming through and learn from everybody, and suddenly in age of 24 being the old guy on the team and stay there for 22 years being the oldest guy on the team. I definitely learned a lot about myself and team members, and I had to, how can I say, I had to develop as hopefully a role model. I haven't always been the best part of myself, but then I had to go back and learn from it. And I appreciated when people told me like, Olaf, it doesn't help me when you shout at me. It doesn't help when you yell. Please give me something else to work on. So I've been totally much better person when I have people around me who actually dare to speak up, because we have what you call it, like a high roof in the training area. So I'm just happy to be a part of the rowing family, because there are so many good people there. And when there are people which is not doing their job as a role model, I do speak freely to them, because we are and shall be role models for all other sports. That's my side of it.
Yeah, and I think your sport colleague from Norway said it very well. If you have teammates who consistently lift you up, then you will work harder and stay motivated. I think that concludes more or less what you just said, that you also need to develop as a person. I mean, you start off as quite young in the rowing career, and maybe not all of us will finish at the age you did with 7 Olympic Games, but I mean, you've learned so much from your first Olympic Games to your last, and it's yeah. Sorry.
The really big difference, I think, is when the athletes want to be a part of the team, or do the athlete want to be the best on the team? So how much can you push, and who shall you push? And when people tells me, I want to be the best rower I can be, but I don't do the work. So there's a conflict of interest. So I think as a role model, how you present it is, you can always discuss it, but when you want to be the best, you need to get known what you have to do. And if you don't do the job, somebody should be honest and tell you this is not good enough if you want to reach your goal. And I think today's athletes, a lot of people actually think they know. They don't, but they think. And as a coach or the oldest guy in the group, this is a really big thing. How do we actually work with this? Because I think a lot of younger athletes can say almost harassment from older people who actually would love try to teach them how to be a better athlete, but they might never actually learn how to speak the right way to the athletes. They do it how their role models before did, like a little bit of yelling, a little bit of shouting, and tell them to do something else. So development in language also is a good thing.
Yeah, of course, that's true. And I think we could spend much more time just discussing the collaboration between the coach and all the athletes he or she is coaching. And without revealing too much, we will discuss this further on next week's webinar with both Olaf and his former coach, Johan Flodin. So we will come back to that for next week's webinar. We need to move on, and I will hand over to Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, you're muted.
Thanks, Frida. I was really interested in Jetse's research findings around the difference in gender, and then following that up with Olaf's comments about becoming a senior athlete. And I just wonder whether there's something interesting there about the longevity of male athletes in the system and the confidence that that gives them. And maybe that's something that we could consider for another time. You know, how does that impact, and what different sort of approach do you take to those female athletes to give them the confidence? But equally, how do you help? I mean, Olaf's point about being on the team a long time and being able to role model, how do you give those younger athletes just coming into the system the confidence to role model almost immediately to junior athletes or to athletes and to people outside of the sport? So I think there's some really interesting thing there. There's a question come in on the chat that I just wanted to read out to you. So it says, following up from what Lenka has mentioned about athletes should say no to being shouted at if it's not beneficial to them, are there any resources and supports available for athletes to really actually stand up for themselves or to back their argument that certain behaviors are okay? Being the driver of change is really hard and lonesome sometimes. So I think it's a really good point. If you feel like you're alone, what resources and supports are there? And if I can throw my first one in there, first of all, is to say, and then open it up to the other panel members, is, I think that sometimes people feel more alone than they are. And if you're feeling these things, quite often other people around you are feeling them too. And finding somebody that you can talk to, talking is always good. So let's put aside the resources for a moment, but that sort of physical support, always know who's on your team and got your back and who you can talk to, because quite often it's not just you. Shall we try, should we go to Yetsa next and then to Lenka?
Yes, please go ahead, Yetsa.
Yeah, sure. So I was going to say that's a very good point. I mean, to what Olaf was saying, change doesn't start. First of all, it doesn't start from the bottom, and second of all, it's not really straightforward. None of this is black and white, and none of this is like straightforward. There's no correct way to coach and correct way to train, and correct. It's really a nuanced system of human behavior and human interaction. I mean, that's just how life is, and training environments are a little microcosm of life, right? So I think healthy sports environments aren't necessarily sports environments where everybody's just lifting you up all the time. You have to have standards. You've got to have a balance. I think there's honesty that is required. And all of that, to me, is what determines a healthy environment. I think the key is to understand that there is healthy stress and then there's toxic, unhealthy stress. And if once you slip into that space where you're noticing that you've got apprehension about going to practice, you notice that you feel paralyzed, you don't feel in flow in the setting where maybe the stress and the pressure that's being applied to you just doesn't work for you, I think that's when you need to raise your hand. It's not saying that everyone needs to just be clapping and giving out gold stars constantly. That's not necessarily going to produce good athletes, but also it's not necessarily a healthy environment. Healthy environment involves balance. So to answer the question, I agree. Change does not start from the bottom, does not start from the weakest within the environment. What Anne-Marie says is true, finding those who are more like you and who have a listening ear so you can express the fact that you feel that some of the expressions of discipline are listing in the direction of toxic stress as opposed to healthy stress. I think that's important. But then to Olaf's point, really understanding that this is all a balance. And therefore, it's not a question of just acting a certain way. It's a question of changing culture and making sure that we're constantly in tune with how healthy this environment is, how can it be improved. And everyone has to roll up their sleeves to get that accomplished. So just picking up on a few of the other points and trying to answer the question as well. So good one.
Thank you, Yetsa. I don't know if it was Lenka or Sandy first, but I hand over to Lenka.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on that question again on a very practical level. I think what Anna-Marie already and Yetsa said, like, the talking about your fellow athletes to find, those who suffer with you is step number one. And I think athletes are actually getting better at that, at talking to each other and actually voicing and recognizing that there is something wrong. But then sort of the follow-up step, which is then really crucial, would be to find an appropriate person to turn to. And that must not be an athlete, because as an athlete, you're within the system. It has to be a safeguarding officer or someone, a person of trust. And that's really, really the difficult part. That's where it gets lonely, even if you have your teammates and everyone agrees sort of that doctor is not behaving appropriately. But where do you turn to? And this is something where we as athletes, we must really unite and stand up and say, look, we need those structures. We need those persons of trust. We need the place where we can turn to, where we know that our concerns are being handled seriously. And then those persons then can take up with that person who misbehaves. Because as an athlete alone, when you're in the selection process, when there's pressure on you, when you want to get into the boat but you're not quite sure, you can't do that on your own. There needs to be an infrastructure.
Thank you, Lenka. Sandy, please go ahead.
My comment is going to be a little bit the other way. Athletes are sometimes responsible for some of the harm. And so, you know, it's important for athletes to call out bad behavior on the part of their peers. So, you know, when you see an athlete who's psychologically beating down another athlete, it is important to call that out, and to call that out so that everybody behaves better, including the athlete who's behaving badly. They need to know that there are better standards than the ones they're upholding. And you know, what the research shows is that peer-on-peer abuse that Anne-Marie mentioned earlier is mostly of the psychological nature, or mental health and so on. It, you know, it's the first avenue into abuse mostly is emotional harm or psychological harm, and the other is sexual harm. And that's from the sexist jokes to the sexual assaults. It's that range there. So as athletes, we have to not only hold each other up as a team to have the best performances, we have to hold each other up in terms of the standards of behavior, call out the bad behaviors, lift them up, lift up the whole team. That's one of the direct actions that athletes can do. So it's back to Jetse and the confidence to express your rights, to express your opinions. It comes right from that source. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandy. We put your slides up here on the screen for everyone to see. Maybe you can quickly walk us through them.
Yeah, I did actually walk through this first one with the psychological harm. In the middle column there, it says psychological harm, and then it shows how much, how many instances were amongst peers who were current athletes or retired athletes. And you can see that 198 out of 830 current athletes had experienced psychological harm by peers. Okay, and the other one, the sexual harm, was most by coaches, but also by peers. Sexist jokes to forced sex and so on. Can you go to the next slide? So the point here is that it's always an adult's responsibility to report. And in rowing, we don't have, as Jetse would say, a lot of young shoulders. We tend to have older athletes, so it's not really an issue for us. We don't have a lot of children, but where we do have children, we can't wait for them to report abuse. We actually have to use the relationship we have amongst athletes to get those stories forward. And the next slide, please. And this one, so what is it that you do? So we've gone around it a bit in the panel. But one of them is what you're doing right now is being aware of the signs of what abuse is like, and what are your rights around getting a respectful environment in which you can thrive. You should know what harm looks like or abuse looks like. So when you're doing something that's harmful, as Olaf said, well, sometimes I don't know whether I'm doing the right thing. So I have to ask, I have to check. But if it hurts, it's wrong. In general, if it hurts an athlete, it's wrong. Am I sure as an athlete? You don't have to be sure. What you can do is report or talk about behavior that you don't think is up to standard. And then there can be a discussion about it. And if you're wrong, or the behavior was misunderstood or something, there's an avenue to talk about it. Always talking. So there are a few other questions down there that would help you clarify, you know, what do I do when I see bad behavior? Who do I talk to about it? What is my role? And your role is, in my view, is to step up and speak out. It's not to solve the problem. It's not to get between people. It's to step up and speak out. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. I do know that we have a question from one of our participants, but before I hand over to Anne-Marie, I would like to ask a question for maybe both our panelists, but also our participants. How can wall rowing, or what can wall rowing do to empower athletes to speak up? You can write it in the chat. It will be confidential. It will just be very helpful for myself and Athletes Commission members to assist you, and also how to proceed forward, because we've only then 2 webinars planned in the safeguarding topics. So please share with you what you think that wall rowing can do to empower athletes to speak up. I'm saying athletes because we are focusing on athletes for these 2 webinars, but it includes everyone within our rowing family. Yes, you're aware of that. So this is a question for everyone at every level, I would say. So please type questions, your responses and feedback in the chat for us. We won't reveal any names. It's just for ourselves. Thank you. Anne-Marie, please go ahead with the question.
Thanks, Frida. Just adding to what Sandy said just briefly before I move on to that, because it's going to move us in a different direction, but I think it's really important to remember that there's an old saying that I think Sandy or one of us talked about the other day: the standard you walked past is the standard you accept. The behaviors that you accept are the behaviors that you think are fine if you walk past them. So always really important not to just be a passive bystander, but to actually be proactive and take action. So the question in the question and answer is, Jetsa, it's to you specifically about your research. You mentioned there were some differences in the study responses between Olympians and Paralympians. Can you just review that again, please, and just give us a little bit more color as to what that might look like?
Yep, absolutely. So I'm just going to pull up that slide. It's in the regression analysis where that came out. And one of the, let me just pull it up for you. Okay, so essentially, if you look at the way Olympian versus Paralympian athletes responded, again, I'm only going to highlight those responses and those correlates that were statistically significant. So when asked, to what extent do you believe in the statement, it's sometimes okay for teammates and others to pressure me in any way? If you were an Olympic athlete, as compared to a Paralympic athlete, you are much more likely to agree with that statement. If you are a Paralympic athlete, you were likely to disagree that it's sometimes okay for teammates and others to pressure me in some way. So that was one of the points. A second point that I found that was of interest, but more importantly, statistically significant, was the statement, it's sometimes okay for coaches to use any kind of violence towards me, for example, intimidation, assault, or coercion. If you're an Olympic athlete, you are more likely to agree with that statement. But if you were a Paralympic athlete, you were less likely, and that was on the order of about 2.5 times. You had 2.5 times the odds of agreeing if you were an Olympic athlete, and the same degree of disagreement if you were a Paralympic athlete. So hopefully that clarifies. So around the concept of violence for coaches, and that includes intimidation, assault, and coercion, and around the concept of pressure from teammates. So those were the 2 that were most statistically significant. And the second one that I just mentioned, the concept of pressure, was on the order of 1.7. So you had about 70% increased odds of agreeing if you're an Olympian, and 70% increased odds of disagreeing if you're a Paralympian. So hopefully that makes sense. There were a few other trends around the Olympic-Paralympic divide, but those 2 I thought were most striking when it comes to the odds ratios and the stats.
Thank you, Jetsa. We're running over a little bit. I hope that's okay for everyone. We will wrap up in a minute or 2. I just have a question, and I think this one will go to Lenka. What can athletes do to help move their national federation on the subject of safeguarding? Do you have any tips for athletes in particular?
I think the first step is to recognize that there's something amiss. And again, just talking from my experience, it's you need to get involved, and especially within federation, it's sometimes very slow moving, but you have to be consistent and put in your proposal for safeguarding policies and keep sort of the pressure on. And it helps if you are integrated in some kind of management board within your federation, because then you know who the right people to talk to. And then we're coming to the right of representation, athletes' rights representation. And I think that's really crucial. If you don't have any athlete within a board, you're not very likely to think about safeguarding or about, you know, those athletes. But if you have an athlete voice there, then use it and, you know, be sort of the good conscience of your federation, and keep using the pressure you have to move the federation in the right direction.
Thank you, Lenke. Thanks. Hannah, I have a question for you and Siswe, if I may. What is the responsibility of an athlete if they become aware of peer-on-peer abuse? Any tips for athletes how to act?
I don't know if anyone wants to go first or must to go.
Please go ahead, Siswe.
Yeah, I think the first thing is to report it. I mean, as the Athletes Justice 5 Athletes Responsibility Rights says, I think for me, a report to the team management. If I answer that right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just reporting it, and as sort of, and it's been brought up before, if there's an athlete chair or an athlete captain or something, making sure that they're aware. But I think as Sandy pointed out before, is calling it out immediately when you see that behaviour, and that creates the culture that you're wanting to create. You know, if you walk past it, you're condoning it in a sense. So calling out that behaviour if you see it against your peers.
And I can also add to what Siswe and Hannah just said, that maybe if you're in a member of a small team, World Rowing always have safeguarding officers in place at all our World Rowing events. So World Cups, European Championships, hopefully at all the continental championships as well, and our World Championships. And even though if it may be a local thing, you can always reach out and ask for assistance, either how to act or how to move forward. Or you can always contact Athletes Commission if that's easier for you, or send an email straight to safeguarding@worldrowing. So we will always be here to assist and guide you if that's helpful for you. We are running out of time, sorry for that. And it's been very interesting to talk with our panelists today. If we could just bring up the live poll again, Ludovica, and take 2 minutes to answer the questions once again. It would be really helpful for us working with safeguarding within World Rowing and for our safeguarding working group. So I encourage all of you, please answer the questions again. I won't take as much time as the first time to go through the results. It would be just very helpful for us to hear what you have to say. Thank you, everyone. I won't read the results this time. I will try and save some time and go straight to the panelists and ask them if you have any final remarks, comments, or takeaways from today's discussions to our participants. And we start with the ladies. So I go to Hannah.
Say that again. Sorry, Lenka. Sorry, Frida. Sorry.
That's okay. If you have any final remarks, comments, or takeaways from today's webinar to our participants.
So many. I loved Jetsa's comments, but Anna Marie's recapping the IOC's rights and responsibilities. But I think our member federations understanding that World Rowing is here to help navigate this space if they need to reach out. There's lots of people here to help.
Thank you, Hannah. I move to Anna Marie.
Thanks, Frida, and thank you to everybody who's been part of today. It's been great to hear the research-based work from Jetsa and from Sandy, and to be able to then use Zizwe and Olaf to translate that into what does that look like on the ground. I'm sure it's something we can build on. I guess my takeaway from this is, what do we do as World Rowing to help encourage our national federations to put things in place that give athletes the confidence to be able to take, you know, their future and their environment into their own hands, and really be able to create the right environment and show the behaviors that they feel are the correct behaviors to support everybody. So still some work for us to do, but we've got another webinar next week to be able to dig down a bit deeper into that.
Thank you, Anna Marie. Lenka, any comments from you?
Yes, I really liked Olaf's honest words about his development as a role model, but I think that's something we know, everyone knows. You're not perfect from the beginning, but you learn. And when you're a kind person, you learn how to really develop into a role model. And I think that's within our athletes community, that's really important, that we are kind to each other, that we help each other, and that we're, you know, helping each other out. And so that's sort of my main takeaway from here. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Lenka. Thank you. Sandy?
Thank you. I enjoyed this very much. It's always interesting to get a bunch of bright minds together who can, you know, mill around in a topic like this. I think the takeaway for me is around what Anna Marie started with the athlete rights and responsibilities, that it's a balance, and that athletes need to know both, and that as athletes you have quite a role to play in creating an environment that's safe and respectful for everyone. It's not that it's the coach's responsibility or the team management's responsibility only. It is also your responsibility, and you and your peers who benefit from it. I think that's my takeaway, is how powerful athletes can be in moving the cultural environment to one that's truly inclusive and safe.
Thank you, Sandy. Jetsa, any final words from you?
Yeah, 100%. So I think I've also enjoyed it. Thanks, Sandy. What our experience as athletes and also the research has shown is that honestly, beliefs and culture, which Sandy just mentioned, are like a little bit like the wind. You can't see it, but it moves the leaves. It directs behavior. It directs how things happen. And so I think I agree, therefore, with what Lenka said, where one of the techniques that World Rowing can use to empower athletes is actually by investing in and professionalizing safeguarding offices. So it takes the responsibility off the athletes and shares it around, not just to the athletes and their behavior, but to the entire environment. So hopefully what the research shows is that it's a mixed bag, it's a nuanced picture, it's not clear. Therefore, it's going to take a little bit more of a layered approach rather than just telling people to behave better. So hopefully that comes across loud and clear. Thanks for the comment in the chat.
Zizwe, any comments from you?
Yeah, thanks team, thanks everyone. I think it's been a good discussion. I wish we had more time. I was more interested in in the presentation of Yetsa. I just didn't get to ask where was this, where in the world and where about was this research done? Because it'd be interesting with this different culture from where I am and this side of town. But that's for next time. And yeah, it'd been also nice to hear a lot from the participants as well. So hopefully the next one we can hear from the participants more questions so we can share a bit of advice and all that. And then with regards to the last question for you to ask, I would like to say, if anything, athletes just need to report. If you are scared to report to your coaches, report to the next person, tell anyone, and get your message across. Thank you.
Thank you, Siswa. And I think we all agree with you that it doesn't have to be a safeguarding officer or someone within World Rowing. It could be your physio, it could be a friend outside of rowing or a teammate. Please don't hesitate to speak up and seek for assistance, help, guidance. Olaf, any final comments from you?
I think actually talk about rowing, we have a job to do to actually open up even more, because I think our environment is still a little bit tough. So we're not so good in actually speaking up when we don't like the way people are talking to each other or behaving. But I also think we need a job where the athletes actually are taking, when the Athletes Commission asks to make a summary or a questionnaire, that we actually take the time to do them, so we can actually get more input how our society actually is. And again, the role model thing, be a role model, say stop. It might hurt for a few minutes to be the one who says stop, but in the end, you'll be the good guy and you will create a better training. Yeah, the whole environment will be better if you actually dare to.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess that should be the final comment of this webinar, that we learn along the way, and we need to be as responsible as we can at any time, and it can be painful sometimes. I would just like to say something to all the participants. If you are affected by the points raised during this webinar, we encourage you to seek out professional help and support. If you raise a question referring to a particular incident or situation, please contact us directly. If you don't have anywhere to report your concerns within your team or federation, send us an email on safeguarding@worldrowing.com. I will ask Lucy to put it up in the chat once again. We won't take up any more of your time. Thank you very much to all the panelists, to Ludovica and to Lucy for organizing this together with the Athletes Commission. Thank you to all your participants. Next Monday, we'll meet again at 1:30 Central European Time. We will then focus on collaboration between the athlete and their coach. So our guest speaker next week is Olaf Tufte's former coach, Johan Flodin. Olaf will also be with us, and we will discuss how they work within their team to both when it comes to behavior within the team, how we speak to each other, how we behave within the group, but also how the team is looked at from the outside.
Oh, then I'm in trouble.
Yes, you are, like always, Olaf. So we encourage you all to join next Monday to discuss further about the collaboration between athletes and coaches. Thank you for today. Looking forward to seeing you all next Monday. Until then, take care.
Thank you, Frida, for leading us through the webinar.
Thank you.